Hello, angels and antichrists. My name is TV Skyen, and if you watched any of the previous What's the Deal With videos, you might know that I'm on a bit of an ongoing quest to catalog some of the older champions of League of Legends, their lore states, and and their character designs and their histories in League of Legends, before Riot inevitably get around to updating them with new lore content or perhaps entire reworks. Which is why today we're going to be asking part 1 of the question, what's the deal with Kayle and Morgana? Now, this is a part 1 because Kayle and Morgana are up for a rework in the near future. It's been teased that they are going to be associated somehow with Targon, that they are maybe going to be failed aspects or halfway ascended creatures from Shurima, something along those lines. Currently, they're affiliated with Demacia as a region. That doesn't seem to be something that's going to be continuing into their new state unless, they invent some reason why they should be. That, however, is really not who they used to be. Kayle and Morgana, much like Six, Cillian, and Alistar, Teemo, Cillian and Alistar, who we already looked at, are champions from all the way back in League of Legends Alpha, like the very, very, very first champions that were ever added to the game, and it shows in a few rather obvious ways. As you may remember, in the early days of League of Legends, character design and champion design was mostly a matter of, let's find an archetype that might be fun to have in the game, make it vaguely unique to our universe so we can claim it as intellectual property and slap it into the game, and don't worry so much about like the wider world building or whether things fit together aesthetically. We'll figure that one out down the line. Just get some bloody champions in the game so we can get going. Consequently, Kayle and Morgana are what you might call slightly uninspired in terms of character concepts, in that Kayle is an avenging angel and Morgana is a fallen angel. And that's sort of really about all there is to them, both as lore concepts and indeed as character concepts. There is a little bit of a sisterly feud between them, which we are going to get into. We're going to start with Kayle, the Judicator. So these blurbs right here on the champion sites are generally written after 2014 in the major lore retcon, and they're just sort of stopgaps to just kind of, here's the vaguest concept of who the character is, and we'll fill it in later with some better information. Like, these were just kind of placeholders until Riot could get around to giving them something better. Consequently, Kayle's goes like this. A great hero and the strongest among her kind, Kayle is an angelic warrior dedicated to purging those beyond redemption. After conflict divided her people, she took up her enchanted armor and flaming sword in the name of order, disowning her very flesh and blood in the process. When Kayle descends upon the field of battle, her justice is swift, for none can escape the light of divine and righteous fury. What you'll notice about this is that this says absolutely nothing about who Kayle is, where she's from, what kind of culture she fits into, or what she really wants as a person. There isn't really much of a character motivation in this thing at all. Like, she's a warrior dedicated to purging those beyond redemption, which doesn't, like, redemption under which moral system? Doesn't say. In redemption for what, under the law of what country? They're not really affiliated with any particular region, and they don't really have much in the way of a personality that comes across in these little blurbs. And not that these blurbs are the place where you get to find, great and deep characterization and stuff like that, but they are profoundly generic. Driven by vindictive obsession, Morgana is a potent mistress of suffering and the black arts. Once a being of grace and light, she was ripped from her kind during an ancient conflict that broke her soul, turning into the cruel tormentor she is today. Comforted by a prophecy that claims she will strike the final blow and gain her revenge, Morgana lies in wait, her lust for power growing endlessly. Again, her revenge for what? She was ripped from her kind during an ancient conflict that broke her soul. What? What? Which conflict? How did it break her? Why did it turn her into a tormentor? What the heck is this prophecy? And it's very, very, very vague. It's just like the vaguest overview of what the character is as a stopgap until they can create something proper and better. More interesting is their biographies as they stand here. In a world far away where an ancient war still rages, Kayle was a great hero, the strongest of an immortal race committed to destroying evil wherever it could be found. For 10,000 years, Kayle fought tirelessly for her people, wielding her flaming sword forged before time itself. By the way, you can't do stuff before time itself, because in order for there to be a before, there needs to be time. So that, anyway, that's nerd nitpicking. That's not really important. She shielded her delicate features beneath her enchanted armor, the sole remaining masterpiece of an extinct race of craftsmen. Though a beautiful striking creature, Kayle now is then, with voice showing her face. War has taken a terrible toll upon her spirit. In her quest for victory, she sometimes would try and lift the wicked up from their morass of evil, but more often than not, she instead purged those she herself deemed beyond redemption. To Kayle, justice can so often be an ugly thing. 10 years ago, Kayle's war against evil was nearly won until her rebellious sister Morgana, a pariah amongst their people, suddenly gained power, which threatened to bring Kayle and her people to their knees. To save her world, Kayle had no choice but to turn her fiery blade towards her own sister, disowning her and drawing the line forever between them. This lore is largely unchanged since 2009. Now, there's been a few, minor edits and additions here and there. The League of Legends has been retconned out of it, obviously, but this is pretty much the exact same biography that Kayle had in 2009. So it's really old, and it shows some of the remainders of the influence of the League of Legends. Specifically, in a world far away where an ancient war still rages, Kayle was a great hero. It tells us that she comes from a world far away, whether that's a different planet or a different dimension, but it doesn't really mention how the hell she came to Runeterra. Why is she here on Runeterra doing things? Well, in the old lore, of course, it used to be that the League of Legends, the summoners, summon her to the League of Legends for a specific reason, which we're going to get into once we have talked about Morgana. But basically, you can tell a lot in this biography that it's missing the premise that makes it make any kind of sense at all, which is that it used to be that they were creatures from a different dimension, specifically a different dimension that had different rules, where you can do stuff before time somehow, and where there can be an eternal war between two opposing factions as a sort of base state of being for the dimension. These things do not exist anymore because the summoners are not there to bridge that divide, and so the lore makes very little sense. And it's also, Kayle's war against evil was nearly won until her rebellious sister Morgana, a pariah amongst their people, suddenly gained power which threatened to bring Kayle and her people to the knees. Insofar as the central conflict that Kayle has as a character, the central motivation she has as a character, the central point of interest there is with her character, is her conflict with Morgana, with her sister. But this is all we get. Her sister's rebellious, and then she gains power, and now she's a threat, so I guess we have to kill her. It's you could maybe expand a little bit on why they hate each other. A tiny little bit, mate. Why does she's a being of justice, and yet she's gotta kill my sister, I'm gonna do that. For very few apparent reasons, except that she has power. This is expanded upon a little bit more in Morgana's lore, which also has not changed since 2009. This is, again, the League of Legends has been added and removed from it, but it's largely the same lore that she had back on the actual release of the game. There's a world far away, populated by graceful and beautiful winged beings, gifted with immortality, where an ancient conflict still rages. Like many conflicts, this war split families. One side proclaimed themselves as beings of perfect order and justice, fighting to unite the world, and their law is strong and central governance. Those that fought against them saw their kin as tyrants, creatures incapable of seeing the larger view, who would sacrifice individuality and freedom for the illusion of efficiency and safety. Morgana was one who fought against what she perceived as the tyranny of her kind, and for that she was branded fallen. Morgana was not innocent, having plumbed forgotten ways to gather forbidden might to become a powerful mistress of the black arts. This goal was driven by her obsession to defeat the general of the opposition army, her sister Kayle. While the two were in fact birth sisters, Kayle struck the first blow by disowning any filial connection when Morgana refused to join her cause. Eventually, Morgana grew in power enough not only to reach but to challenge Kayle, yet Morgana was never after a fair fight. She lies in wait, growing in power, preparing for the day that will mark their final conflict. For even though Kayle struck the first blow, Morgana would surely strike the last. Once again, some similar features. She's from a world far away. How does she get to Runeterra? We don't know. Just somehow, I guess, and why does she hate Kayle? We know that she's driven by an obsession to defeat the general of the opposition's army, but she refuses to join her cause, and now they have to kill each other. It's a very vague and thin characterization going on there when it comes to, it wouldn't be called fratricide, would it? And it wouldn't be called matricide either. Sororicide? I think so, possibly. Anyway, sister killing, sibling killing. We're just gonna do that because we have irreconcilable differences that we're not gonna elaborate on much. And again, what happened in the old lore was that Morgana managed to get in contact with the summoners of the League of Legends. They live in a completely different dimension from Runeterra, but Morgana gets in contact with the summoners and says, hey, I will fight in the League of Legends for you guys if you will give me magical power enough that I can challenge and threaten my sister. Kayle finds out that the reason Morgana is suddenly super crazy strong is because she has the help of the summoners of the League of Legends, and so she goes to one of the head summoners of the League of Legends with a proposition. If you just stop supporting my sister, stop messing with my dimension, just stay out and don't screw with our world, I will fight in the League of Legends for 1,000 years as well. And so the conflict between Kayle and Morgana specifically moves to the fields of justice, where they fight in the service of random city-states and their political agendas, because the summoners decided to be assholes and mess with a dimension like that. Like, that's literally, like, a lot of the early lore of the League of Legends is like, a lot of the champions just show up because the summoners are dicks. Like, they're just dicks. Like, Fiddlesticks happens because some overconfident asshole summoner decides that he can control demons and summon shit, and so Fiddlesticks gets summoned. Now there's this horrifying demon scarecrow inside the Institute of War because one of the summoners decided to be an asshole. And Malphite, oh, poor Malphite. He's like a rock elemental from a rock dimension, and he's very happy in the rock dimension because everything is harmonious and ordered in the rock dimension. And then the summoners are like, let's open a portal and pull out whatever's in there. And they pull Malphite into Runeterra. And he's fucking confused because this is not a rock dimension. Everything is wrong. Everything is weird and strange, and he doesn't know what the hell is going on and where his place in the world is gone. You know, doesn't know who he is. And the summoners are like, hey, since we have now taken away everything that has ever mattered to you, you should fight for us in the League of Legends because you owe us a favor for fucking up your life forever. Like, the summoners used to be dicks. Let's just be clear about that. Anyway, that doesn't really have much to do with Kayle and Morgana, except that, once again, it's the summoners just screwing with a world that they have no right to screw with. It's the same thing with frickin' Nasus. Like, Nasus is like a god in his own world doing important god shit, and then the summoners are like, you're gonna come with us now, yoink! And they just pull him into the League of Legends. It's like, the poor dude is like, he just decides to stay, I guess, but still, he didn't ask to go there. Summoners are assholes, man. Anyway, that is a bit of a tangent. So, what we established so far is that Kayle and Morgana have very, very basic lore. We have this sort of this conflict between order and chaos, this sort of conflict between good and evil, between light and dark. Like, it's very much this binary thing of each character represents one side of a binary. It's not so much a Taoist kind of yin and yang so much as it's a more Christian morality, mythological situation of good and evil, God and the devil, and that's very much what they're drawing on, which is kind of avoidable when you're doing imagery of, you know, avenging angels and fallen angels. You do tend to get into Christian mythology or potentially Jewish mythology, but more likely it's taken from Christian mythology and imagery. And so we have Kayle, who is just like the most generic possible thing that you can be as an avenging angel, which is an angel in golden armor with, like, feathered bird wings and a flaming sword. Just about the most generic image you could possibly have an angel. Now, for Kayle, as a character design, I think it actually kind of works, because there is power in simplicity, and if you're gonna do an avenging angel character, you could do worse than just playing it completely straight. Although the boob plate, which they added to her for, I don't know why the hell they added. Like, she didn't used to have boob plates, by the way. That was on her old character model before she had her visual update. She just had a normal breastplate that was like, it had like some ridges on it and shit like that, but there was no boobs. There was no indication of breasts underneath it. It was just a normal chest plate, and then they decided to add that with her updated splash art, and it's dumb, and I've talked about boob plates at length in other videos, so you can go and look those up if you're interested. But there are a couple of interesting things going on with Kayle. Something I've talked about before is part of the reason why character designers tend to put boob plate on female armored warriors is because they are desperate to communicate that the character is in fact female. Like, the character designer has decided that the gender of the character is important, it needs to be communicated visually. How can we do that when we have armor that tends to be a thing that erases any distinguishing features, especially secondary sex characteristics? And one of the solutions that character designers tend to come up with is boob plate. And, like, okay, if you absolutely, definitely, decisively need people to know that the person underneath the armor is a lady, then fine, I guess boob plates, if you absolutely must. Another thing they do is that you can see here that Kayle is wearing a breastplate and then these what are they? Around her hips, she's got these flaps of armor. This is a trick they also use with Leona, where they mimic the imagery of a skirt by having these armor flaps on the sides that widen her hips a little bit more. And by taking away the armor just around the midriff, they also give her a little bit more of an hourglass figure, which again enhances femininity in the design and encodes the design as feminine, which makes it easier to read as female. The thing I would point out about that, though, is that Kayle's gender isn't really important to the character at all. Like, outside, unless you think it's thematically incredibly important that they are feuding sisters, rather than just feuding siblings, then Kayle's gender is immaterial to her character, especially because she's supposed to be an embodiment of unfeeling, cold, sort of repressive order, like order that permits no individuality. And that certainly seems to be Morgana's perspective on why Kayle's side is wrong, is that they enforce uniformity and conformity with no possibility for conflict or difference. And then, at that point, erasing gender, erasing all markers of identity from a character design perspective would be the sensible thing to do. That Kayle represents this faceless, lifeless, emotionless, just rigid, inflexible, unfeeling order that doesn't allow for any individuality, any expression of the individual. I would just erase the gender markers entirely. I wouldn't really give her any secondary sexual characteristics, because that enhances the feeling that this is something that does not permit such things as identity at all, of any kind. But Kayle gets the best, I think, of the duo of Kayle and Morgana when it comes to character design, because again, she's a straight-up Avenging Angel, using the basic straight-up Avenging Angel character design, and it works perfectly fine for the purposes. Morgana, on the other hand, we have talked about her before. I believe it was in my worst character designs of League of Legends video that I mentioned her at length, and without meaning to go over those points too much over and over again, is that Morgana isn't the opposite of Kayle. Like, that's fundamentally, that's the big issue between them, is that Morgana isn't the opposite of Kayle, which is a problem because the whole, like, again, like we talked about with their lore, with their story concepts, the whole thing about them is this rigid binary division of one thing, light versus darkness, order versus chaos, good versus evil, these binary polar opposites that are completely separate from one another. Now, this doesn't mean that, like, they are siblings, they're sisters, so it makes sense that there is some visual affinity between them, which can be established, for instance, with the wings, or by having them wear similar fashions, but Morgana needs to be more of an opposite of Kayle, and the trouble is, because Kayle's armor is gendered, because it's sexual, it is not, well, not sexualized, that's absolutely the wrong word, but because it's gendered, because it has obvious femininity markers added to it in the form of boot plate, in the form of the widened hips and the hourglass figure, then Morgana being much more obviously sexualized, which is, she has her breasts out and she wears this super low robe that just sort of like barely covers her genitals, or barely covers the area before like pubic hair starts to show and shit like that. Like, the concept there is okay, that Kayle is the one who's all locked away, who's all repressed, who has no sexuality about her whatsoever, and then Morgana is the one who's sexually open, sexually free. That's a very common way to sort of establish a conflict between like order and chaos, is that the person who is rebellious is also more sexual. It's an old, boring trope, but it's one that would work if they hadn't given Kayle the damn boot plates, which do like bring a sexual aspect to her character design, and it kind of blurs the line of that particular distinction. And anyway, I do think that like evil is sexy is boring. Like, it's such a bog standard. It's so expected. Like, it's the oldest trope in the book. Hundreds of thousands of characters have been made that just kind of, oh, we have to have an evil character. Let's make her more sexy than the good characters in order to emphasize their. It's just kind of boring, and it's a lazy character design decision. The trouble, however, is that it also doesn't really work so much because they don't actually commit to it. Morgana has her breasts out because she's only wearing a bra for whatever the hell reason, but her character design isn't really about being sexy versus Kayle being completely sexless, right? Because if you wanted to really establish that difference, then you would have to design Morgana more along the lines of someone like Evelyn, who is like whose physical expression is very much about sex and sexuality, in order to really emphasize that disconnect between that, like that polar opposite difference between the two. But they don't really. Like, it's Morgana, it's kind of weird. Like, first of all, they do the lazy thing, and then they don't do the lazy thing with enough commitment to be interesting. Is sort of the fundamental issue there. It's also, I don't know why Morgana is hot, because again, traditionally what you would associate, like, with the very stereotypical things you associate with good is beauty. Like, brightness, lightness, beauty, like, those are the stereotypical, boring as hell, but stereotypical associations with good is beauty. And the stereotypical association with evil is not conventional beauty. It's either unconventional beauty, or it's ugliness, or it's like, it's disease, it's being plague-ridden, it's being, you know, deformed, it's some kind of physical marker of their evil. And again, these are old, boring-ass tropes that I would prefer that people would stop using all the frickin' time for no good reason, but if that's the game you're gonna play, you're gonna have to commit to it. So for Morgana, like, I would have her be missing some fingers on one hand, or like have chunks of her flesh torn out and have terrible scars over it, or like she's ridden with disease because she's been practicing the black arts and it's corrupting her. Like some sort of visual marker that really signifies that we're going ham, we're going hard, we're going full on the stereotypical dark versus light subversion opposition, but they don't, and it's just kind of like, for one thing, you could also, what about having Morgana wear the same armor and outfit as Kayle, except hers is all broken and shattered and kind of hanging from her in clumps and strips, and like it's clearly been torn apart, and make her wings not just, and especially in game, her wings don't really look like they're that destroyed, but really make the wings look tattered and torn and ragged and torn, like not just missing a few feathers, but really bloodied and destroyed. Really go ham, go hard on it. And that's kind of the thing that's always the trouble with Morgana, is that there's sort of hints that they had some kind of idea of what I'm saying already, but they just did not commit to it at all. And that's what makes it really boring. Anyway, Kayle and Morgana, old character design concept, they have had no lore updates. Like, the only official piece of media, lore content, that Kayle and Morgana have appeared in since they were added to the game in 2009 is the cinematic trailer for League of Legends, the original cinematic teaser, where they have a little bit of a fight for, I think, like 5 to 10 seconds or something in the beginning of the animated short, and then don't really show up so much again. That's it. And that's... it's kind of a problem, really. Because, again, they've had 9 years to do something, anything, for these... Like, Riot has had enough time, and that's part of the reason why I'm doing these videos, is because, like, I'm not going to stop harping on about this, that Riot have historically failed to execute on their lore. They have historically just completely and utterly failed to create the kind of compelling fantasy universe that they're going to need to have when League of Legends stops being one of the most popular video games in the world, which it will someday. The only thing that's going to be left is the stories. I covered all this in my League of Legends lore retcon video, but I'm kind of restating it here just to get the point across. So, this is part 1 of the video. Part 2 will be coming along whenever Kayle and Morgana are finally properly updating. We're going to take a look at what's the contrast between their new and their old designs. Have Riot improved on any of the things that I said? Or have they gone in a completely different direction, like taking a completely different tack from what I've been talking about here? And how will their lores be interacting in the future? I'm curious to see it, but for now, it's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching this one. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, there's a like button down below, subscribe button, bell icon, comments, blah, 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 all of that stuff. You already know what to do. You've seen YouTube videos before. I'm kind of tired because it's late in the night. I'm recording multiple videos today because I really do want to get these things out before Riot all of a sudden drop a retcon on us and I have to update something. If you want to, I do have a Patreon that you can support for, if you have $1. That's like a lot. I've heard from people where it's like, I don't feel like giving you $1 is like worth anything, but I promise you, $1 is worth a lot to me. It truly, genuinely is worth a lot more than you think. Like, $1 is worth like 1,000 views on YouTube, depending on your ad click-through rate and other boring stuff like that. But like $1 matters. So if you have a creator that you like, whether it's me or it's someone else, and you have $1 to spare, consider donating it to someone who you think deserves it, because it really genuinely does make a difference for us. It really truly genuinely does. If you don't, or if you can't, or if you're not willing to support monetarily on Patreon, of course, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's a voluntary thing for people who have a little extra lying around that they don't mind parting with. So, I feel like there's something I'm supposed to do at the end of the video. All right, dislike button. Yeah. There's a dislike button down below that you can click on. Although I should warn you that when you click on the dislike button, there's going to be like a sorcerer from some kind of alternate dimension. He's just kind of reach through the dislike button and just like grab you by the collar and pull you. And you're going to be in a different dimension. And they're going to be like, hey, you can never go back to the place that you came from. And everyone you have ever known is going to be dead before we ever let you go back home. So why don't you come with us and fight in our Bloodsport tournament, where you will have to kill and be killed and kill and be killed and kill and be killed and kill and be killed in an endless, ceaseless cycle of violence for our entertainment and in order to advance the political agendas of our city-states. And in return for that, we'll give you, something. You can have an ice cream, maybe a hot dog, I don't know. But you can't go back home. You can never go back home. Because we're summoners, and we've decided that this is where you're going to be fighting forever. Summoners are assholes, man. Thank you very much for watching.